All right, and now we're actually with you guys.
Yeah, welcome back us.
Welcome back us. Wait, hold on, what was I doing? Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Philadelphia. Oh, yeah, so for those of you who are like, what the heck is going on with these guys? Well, we just found out we were talking to no one for about 5 minutes or so.
I know.
And you would think that wouldn't be that weird for us because we've been doing it for a week and a half.
Yeah, but you know what we really didn't tell you is that we now start to stream at 7:37. That's how
airplanes
this works.
And
the curvature
what's
of
it called?
the Earth,
the same both ways, forward and back, palindrome.
Yes.
But yeah, actually, we accidentally started going live to unlisted, I think, or something. We didn't go live to the right spot. That's the first for us, but it was good. We got a nice little 5-minute warm up.
Yeah. So we're warm. Sorry for y'all.
Yes, really.
As usual, our technical difficulties they don't really feel bad to us, but I'm sure
they
it's
don't.
frustrating to anyone on the other side.
It kind of like some people's love life.
Was it good for you? Is good for me.
Yeah, and it's also kind of like some people's untreated mental health problems.
Yes. Y'all missed that little segue last time too.
Yes, you
we
did.
started talking about mental health and emotions, and why was that?
Oh, dang. We had some really breakthrough points.
We did. I'm sorry y'all missed them.
It's too bad they're lost
They
forever.
got super profound in about 3 minutes.
Yep, thank you very much. It's been the morning show. I guess that we should probably tell people. Oh, hold on. Let's give them the daily writer close-up. Oh, and welcome to the morning show. I am Reed Garcia, founder of Help for Life.
This is Ryder Richards, co-host on the morning show, name to be changed eventually.
Yes, and we're trying this thing where we see how many days Ryder can give himself some sort of different introduction, so far he's on 7 and 7.5, I think.
Yeah, I don't want to be put into a box. I'm real rebellious.
Yeah,
you can probably tell.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So we have a special guest today. So that was some of the news that we had done just the greatest, most eloquent job of introducing earlier on our previous messed up stream. But for today, we have Known Wells. He's the founder of the Feely Human Collective and the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, which is You, Me, Empathy. And, I'm not going to put words in our viewers' mouths, but I bet when some viewers hear that sentence, they just kind of pucker up and they're like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Empathy.
Yeah, exactly. But, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today is, regardless of where you are on that mental health journey or whatever, talking about feelings and things like that, like
air quotes
feelings.
Yes.
Exactly. But what's a good step you could take today to move a little more in that direction? And if you haven't clicked off yet, hopefully you'll stay with us.
Right. And maybe the other thing is, why would anyone want to move in that direction? Like, it is hard enough just to exist on your own, much less have empathy for somebody else. Like, I just don't have energy, maybe.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Well, my favorite way to look at this lens is, I'm gonna watch this and listen to it, and then I'm gonna send it to everybody around me.
Yeah,
because
this
come
is
on,
what you need.
Right?
You need empathy, not me.
Exactly. That's why his podcast is called You Need Empathy. Actually, that's not what it's called. It's
no,
you,
not at all.
Me Empathy. That me might be a little bit important, but let's ask Known a little bit about that later.
Yeah. So he'll come on the last half of the show?
Yeah, so he will be joining us at 8 a.m. Central Time. So it's about 19 minutes from now. And we are looking forward to having him. And but yeah, until then, don't worry. We're not only going to talk about those things because you know how these shows goes. Who knows what we're going to talk about?
Yeah.
It's almost as if we don't even know what we're going to talk about.
That would be so weird.
Yeah, that would
if we were just winging this whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know who would do that type of thing.
No, so disrespectful to the audience.
Yes,
we would never do that.
Right.
To you. We totally have a script.
Yeah. So we were saying.
Yeah.
So no, So a little bit of course, for those of you who have followed our journey here a little bit, which is maybe one or two people out there. Hello.
Hi.
we have been failing forward. We've been very unashamed of airing our dirty laundry, whether it be accidentally streaming to the wrong thing, whether it be, showing, oh, look, hey, it says episode 7 today.
What?
That's
Oh,
correct, hopefully, and hopefully on all the screens, versus the other times where it's not been correct.
Right.
And then, things like not having the exact name nailed down in the tagline. We're all about airing our dirty laundry. And being interested in, hey, the bigger picture, the longer term, we'll just get a little bit better every day, right? I don't see how that can't have a parallel to, our personal journeys every day and how we're able to keep ourselves roughly in the right mindset. So, I don't know. Real quick, we'll just talk for a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk at more length when Noan comes on. What's something about mindset that has popped into your mind over the last, I don't know, couple of weeks, months, years?
Yeah, there is something really fantastic about the idea of like how failure can become success simply by shifting your mindset. There's these little things that we can get into that are it's strange because I've been listening to the Dr. Andrew Huberman podcasts and lectures where he really talks about the way that you perceive something is the way that your body handles it. So when it comes to things like stress, for instance, we all feel stress, but some stress can be exciting. Going to a scary movie, jumping out of an airplane, if you actually want to do that. Then those things can be super exciting to somebody. And there's ways to get your body to actually react positively to those if it's a positive stressor. And what he talks about is the way that your neurochemical stuff interacts is when your amygdala gets involved, it becomes a negative stress. So you attempt to not get your amygdala hijacked.
Which is a part of the brain.
Yes,
amygdala.
Yes. Sorry about that.
No, it sounds like it would be good kind of fried up with some eggs for breakfast.
little
amygdala.
It does sound like a Mexican food dish.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And, being the nerd, especially electrical engineer as I am, I often like to think of people as computers. And, we have the hardware, which is, in reference to a computer, that's things like your processor, your motherboard, all the things that you can physically touch and are inside of your computer. In case you're like, I've never heard of any of those things. Those are inside that big case or laptop or whatever. So that's the hardware. And then there's the software, which is all of the code and programming that people write to make your computer work the way it does. And so I like to look at people as kind of a mix of hardware and software. And on the show, at least once or twice, we've talked about how you like to think you have all this higher will, all this kind of stuff, free will, and you're unique and special. And you are. Don't get me wrong, you are. But you're also 99 point whatever percent the same as everybody else, just by the fact that we're an animal. And your hardware is effectively the same. Like, some people may have a little bit better hardware or worse hardware. I've heard plenty of women in their, every age talk about that, how they're comparing hardware. But and then there's the software on top, which is, that's the part that you have a little bit more control over, and you can reprogram yourself and how you do things. And just like computers, every day we as humans, we're getting all sorts of inputs, and then we get to decide what we do with those inputs, and more importantly, we get to decide what our output is.
Yes, no, this is really great. It's also something that, of course, our listeners should be aware of, that at any age and time so far, the way that psychology works and the way we use comparisons is the highest technology of the age is how we compare the human mind to it, right? So during the Industrial Revolution, the human was a machine, right? And then later it became telephones. And then, and as technology increases, then all of a sudden humans become compared to the most complicated technology at the time, right? And so the other funny thing about that is with computers, they actually seem to be working towards simulating humans. What I find also fascinating is, if we're going to continue the computer analogy with the hardware and software, there's also something interesting about the way culture interacts on people. So maybe we're all, like, in a certain part of the country, we're all running on Windows, and then in another part of the country, they're all running on iOS, right? So it's something funny to think that other people made the decisions to make Windows the way it is. yet it's the platform that we're running on, culturally speaking. So yes, we do have if we're individual PCs or we're individual computers, we're also running hardware and software for ourselves, but that software is often created outside of us and it is brought into us.
Right, and I don't think I've ever thought of it with those levels or to that extent, but in effect, every place you go, all the people you're around, they're basically injecting their own software to you, right? And so like, hey, I live in Texas. Oh, load the Texas firmware. Oh,
Yeah,
which is
right,
also
right.
in the South. Oh, load that firmware, but it's also still Texas. Load the Texas firmware.
Yeah,
You know,
for some reason, the Texas firmware is really big.
yeah,
Yeah.
biggest you've ever seen. Biggest you ever
It's a
seen.
huge firmware.
Yeah, don't mess with Texas.
Oh gosh.
But yes, you know, talking about this software, hardware, people, you know, this actually will take us to our next little bit here, which is going to be a little bit of a tech discussion. And it kind of relates a little bit with mental health. It kind of relates a little bit with productivity, but it also just relates to your everyday. And that is reducing your inputs and reducing those things, especially if you realize there are things that cause you negative emotions like stress or anxiety or sadness or depression or whatever. Like if you are able to control your inputs, then it can make a really big difference.
Yeah, no, it should, right? I mean, this is also kind of a fascinating time period we're in. We're now living in what a lot of people are calling the attention economy. And if you've watched anything about social media, then you kind of realize that what companies are vying for now is time on device, right?
Right.
Time on platform. And they want you sucking all your attention into these devices or platforms, and that's how they monetize it. But what's really kind of fascinating about that is as a species, evolutionarily, we were not accustomed to this dramatic amount of change, right? All the shifting lights, the colors, those are all playing off of our evolutionary features to keep us constantly fixated on these moving things. And yet what would be funny is if you just turned your device off or flipped it over and paid attention to the sky, it might actually be better for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to mention along those lines, if I can remember it, was gone now. But
Yeah. Well, we were talking about like evolution and the way that our species is
yes,
developed
yes.
within the
So
attention
that
economy.
so a very common thing that if you haven't heard before is something called the fight or flight response. And basically what happens is, you know, in caveman days, right? Oh, I don't like this really happened to a lot of humans, but it's a good picture, right? I see a lion like right out of the corner of my eye coming close to my tribe. Well, guess what? It triggers that adrenaline, it triggers that stress, it triggers that fight or flight response. And guess what? Like in this day and age, in this modern day and age, we have things that are triggering that same response, are getting us all that hyped up, adrenaline, things like that. But maybe it's just a text to my friend, or maybe
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a ping from work, or maybe it's a budget alert.
Right. No, there's so many now. And then, you know, going back to those Andrew Huberman podcasts I've been listening to, there's also something where if you're watching your sports team play, for instance, right, we are tribal when you're bringing up these ideas of a lion attacking the tribe, then these kind of communal structures, when they're threatened, our responses go through the roof. And what's funny is even watching your football team on television or whatever, you will have the same exact response. You will have the same elevated heart rate and everything else as if you were actually in the moment of something sort of traumatic happening to your tribe. So there becomes this issue of us getting addicted to those chemicals.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the huge part. And you know, a lot of people, addiction's a strong word, right? And I think
Yeah.
it kind of comes also with the mindset, especially here in America, with that where people think it's that one or zero, that on or off. For those following the lovely computer analogy, binary is ones and zeros. One means on and zero means off. But yeah, it's either on or off because they think, oh, I'm either an addict or I'm not. And a lot of that comes with because of the labels and the thoughts and things around it, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that when it comes to mental health as well, the labels that come with that and the fact that in reality it's more of that spectrum and more of that continuous thing and versus that on or off.
Yeah, you know, there's some other things too that I kind of found out a couple of years ago. I had an interesting encounter. a friend of mine was sort of accosted by a homeless person, and I kind of watched this interaction take place. And the person was calling them a racist and calling them all these horrible things, and my friend just took all of it and was like, "You're probably right." And I was like, "Oh my god, this sort of fascinating mindset of when somebody labels you as an addict or something else, and just going like, I'm gonna take that on and really deal with it, like right, not being sort of accosted or affronted by these labels, but just taking them on and going like, probably everyone's addicted to something all the time, and it would be fascinating if we just remained open to that instead of declaring this as a
Right.
negative.
I was about to admire and point out like what your friend did there was great. I mean, they had those inputs coming at them, which they probably didn't want. They probably weren't looking for.
Right.
As much as people aren't looking for homeless people to interact with them and yell things at them. But yeah, but then he, she, they, whoever were, they chose what they did with that, right? And instead of, which is such a common reaction right now, which is because it's hardwired in ourselves, in our human body, is to get that defensive nature, right? And be like, oh, you're attacking me, you're coming at me, right? And so that gets you into that, no, I'm not doing anything wrong, also go away, or I'm gonna run away, or I'm gonna fight you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that fight flight response shows up. And I think the sort of other interesting thing about our society, right, that we've heard on and off for a while, is that we're being trained to be sort of more docile over time, right? You should never fight. Flight is acceptable, but fighting isn't.
Yeah.
And so that's also sort of a fascinating aspect, but there's this third option no one talks about, which is doing neither.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to fight, you don't have to flee. Sometimes you can, and you don't have to just freeze up and sit there, but there's times where you could just be open for the next step, whatever that is.
But I also wonder, right? Like, back in the old days, from what I hear, maybe
Yeah.
you can relate.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, for example, like my dad and his brothers and things like that. I've heard so many stories about the fights that they've gotten into and whatever, and those often meant physical. And I'm sure that happens still in this day and age, but I feel like it happens a whole lot less, especially in places that are more controlled, like schools and things like that, right?
Right.
And I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's probably largely for the best that has gone down. But also I wonder, like, hey, are these people finding another way to get out their anger or whatnot?
Let's check with Twitter. Have there ever been any fights on Twitter? I mean, what happens to all that anger, angst, and emotion? This is, if these are biologically built into us, if this is,
Right.
I watch kittens fight all the time on Instagram. It's one of my favorite things because they're so dang cute,
Nice.
but at the same point in time, like, if humans have those same kind of responses, where are they being channeled? How are we channeling? Like, what's happening with this? Because if this gets shifted into social in and out group fighting, that's just as destructive, but in a different way.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to point out real quick, and then I'm going to get to that technology tip I was mentioning, is that's one of the reasons why when it comes to things like politics and religion and, certain things that people get so loud and aggressive and defensive is because those things that people are yelling loudest about in general, they strike really close to someone's identity. It's something that they really deeply believe. And so whether you realize it or not, by like disagreeing with them, and oh, by the way, you're probably not doing the best job of approaching them with this disagreement, right? That's a big part of it too, is being aware enough to know how to approach and approach that lion, if you will, in the right way. But yeah.
The disagreement thing and the identity thing is really interesting to think about. It's really interesting to think that we have external things and ideological things that we internalize, and we create our identity through them. And if you're creating your identity through something that's external to you, that's kind of fascinating, because you as a person will always be you. There is no way anyone could take anything away from you that would make you not you. Yet people seem to think that they could. And so they get really worked up about fighting about some of these things. And I'm not saying that there aren't things to be fighting about, but there is kind of a level of awareness, I think, that's necessary. And it's and I've just learned about a lot of this a couple months ago. There's actually a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. And if anyone's interested in mental health and the way that we take on identity and the way we let ourselves be sort of triggered and we build narratives around ourselves, we're almost always in our heads thinking and talking about ourselves to ourselves. And that's crazy, right? That sounds like a crazy person. We're just not verbalizing it. If you start talking, all the time to yourself, then people go, "Well, I'm crazy now." But we're doing it all the time in our heads anyway. So part of it is recognizing those voices and recognizing that we're reinforcing narratives and structures about our correctness, our place in the world, all of these things. And interestingly enough, if you let all that go, you still have your place in the world.
Yeah.
The world is still there, and you're doing
Right.
just fine without continually reinforcing these narratives.
And honestly, I got to respond to this before I get to the tech tip. But that's something that honestly I've had the privilege of learning a lot more about as largely through my wife. Over the last couple of years, she recognized that she had anxiety, and I've later realized that, guess what? I can be anxious as well, right? I
What?
think
You?
I know.
No?
I think that she is anxious a little more often than I am, right? And she's more likely to go those places than I am. But I can relate, and I've felt the types of things that they felt, and maybe some of that is I'm feeling those for the first time, but I also think some of that is, I'm aware of why I feel a little off in the situation.
Yeah.
Right? Go ahead.
No, yeah, the awareness part is I think key and foundational to these. Just feeling it, knowing it, watching your body react to it. There's a lot of little signs, and once you become accustomed to them, you go, "Oh, my body's doing that thing right now. I
Yeah.
must be anxious."
Yeah, and honestly, so for me and my journey or whatever, it makes it sound grand or whatever, but I actually ended up going to what was called an emotional fitness class. I'm not sure if I've told you about this before, but
Were you sore afterwards?
This is so sore. Only especially on day 2. And let me tell you about leg day. Let me tell you about
Emotional leg
emotional
day.
leg day. But no, it was an 8-week program, and it was a group thing, which we can talk about a little bit later, about what group versus individual does.
Yeah.
But each week they talked about something different. They had these different, basically, principles or tenets that they were talking about around, self-awareness, empathy, and various things like that. And it was interesting because their whole marketing and framework was emotional fitness, and it's like a gym class, like just like you go to a gym to maintain your body. Here's this gym for you to work out your emotions and your mental side of things. So, anyways, I wanted to tie the knot or the bow on what I was saying about Danielle was, so being around her and also talking with her and also seeing her journey as she deals with and recognizes more and journals about and goes to therapy about, it has helped make me be a lot more aware, both one for myself, but two, now when I'm in other situations around other people, I try and do some things to help lower the anxiety in the room, which I think I did kind of naturally already, but now it's kind of like amped up. It's like, okay, now I recognize, like, oh, that's probably triggering for somebody, let's fix that, and those types of things.
Yeah, there's something about that awareness and being able to sort of mediate between it in situations. Man, we could go down some rabbit holes there.
We
Maybe
could.
I shouldn't.
No,
I will hold off.
Yeah, you shouldn't, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But the other thing was going to be with, if you think that you're not anxious or whatever, let me know how you feel after you get into a car with a bad driver, and then tell me that you don't ever feel anxious.
Yeah. I think everyone's had that experience.
Yes.
And there's also this tendency for control.
Okay.
That comes from that.
So real quick, I was going to give my tech tip, which actually kind of doubles as a challenge, and then we're going to get over to known in a second. The tech tip, which is actually a challenge, is a simple one, but you may find it harder than you would think, because simple is not the same as easy. And that challenge is for you, the viewer, you, the audience member. Today, go revamp your notifications and on your phone and on your computer. And what I mean by revamp your notifications is turn them all off, or at least as many of them as you can. What are your thoughts on this, Ryder? Have you ever done anything like that?
This is great. I hate being at the beck and call of my phone. Why would I be? Like it's fascinating to yes. I will just short answer yes before I jump off into another tangent. But yeah, I think I receive phone notifications, and that's about it. I don't even think I take text notifications anymore. I don't want to be disrupted at any point during my day with whatever I'm thinking or doing. I want to give that thing my full and complete and undivided attention. And you know what? The phone will always be there. Those messages and notifications will always be there. Oh, I need to keep talking. Give me just a second. Yeah, sort of shorted out mentally there. But yeah, I figured out some of this during COVID by watching other people talk about how they handled stress and
Yeah.
anxiety. And one of the things is we are in a world of distraction, looking for your attention. Why do you want to be buzzed all the time? And they would talk about it as little dopamine hits. And we've also, through the Andrew Huberman podcast, have learned that this is not about pleasure. It's about motivation and drive. You're not actually getting pleasure by seeing those little dings come in. And that was a mistake about how people used to think about dopamine. What you're actually getting is motivation because it's about you.
Ah.
And so you're getting motivated to react. You're getting trained to react. What's really fascinating is when I first started meditating, I would find myself reaching and grabbing my phone without even thinking about it. So I have been so deeply trained that I will now pick up my phone for no reason at all.
Yeah. And so, again, to turn it back to the challenge is to turn off all of your notifications. If, and some people are like, I can't do that. Oh, I can't. Well, here's the thing. Just try it. Just try it for a day or at least for 2 hours or whatever. And just observe and see, like, how does it change you? And guess what? For those people who are really, the word is addicted, but you may not recognize that, you find yourself still reaching for it, like just subconsciously, right? And so part of it is about breaking that habit loop and recognizing, like, hey, and of course, like, this is for everyone to decide. I'm not trying to prescribe anything to anybody. Like, if you decide that's what you want to do and how you want to use your device and things like that, then go for it. All I'm encouraging you is to maybe take a second, step outside of yourself and look and say, hey, if I were to watch myself for the day, like,
Right.
Is that how I want to be interacting with my device? And is it letting me control me versus me to control it a little bit more?
Yes.
And so, yeah, so that's the challenge. And, oh, by the way, one way to go into your settings, turn off all your notifications. Another way is to use the do not disturb function. That's a shortcut. All of you guys can do that right now. If you're on an iPhone, I can tell you for sure, you swipe down from the top right and then hit that do not disturb. It looks like a moon. And then you, once you do that, you just go put it in the other room. Put it out of your reach.
Yeah, and the thing is, you'll start jonesing for it. That's okay.
Yeah.
Like, just sit there and feel it.
Right.
You don't have to act. You can just feel.
Which is a great, bringing it back around to that emotional fitness class that I took. One of my big realizations was around self-awareness. And at least per their definition, there were two parts of self-awareness. One, and I actually went in, I self-rated, like, I think I'm pretty good at self-awareness. But then I realized there were two parts. The first part is recognizing you're feeling weird or something's off or whatever. So having that awareness about yourself. But then the next part is, doing something about it, or at least like being okay with it. And that's the part that I still need to work on, right?
Right. You're a fixer. You want to fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we have our guest here known. And so we're going to get to him in 1 second. But I wanted to point out one of our commenters for today. We've got Practical Engineering. He's here to say, sup, guys.
What's up?
Yes, and for those of you who have no idea who Practical Engineering is, I don't blame you. I mean, look at that. He's got like a hat and glasses.
Kind of incognito working guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, actually, Practical Engineering is one of my friends from college. He and I, his name's Grady. He was in Engineers Without Borders with me back in college. And now he was a civil engineer, or is a civil engineer, and he started a YouTube channel. And
cool.
Kind of classic YouTube growth story. And now I think he's got like 3 million subs or something crazy. Like, and when he launches stuff, they go on the trending and things like that. So he is the closest thing to a celebrity that I have. And so, yeah, I all the time I've photoshopped myself in so many pictures with him, and but yeah. So let's go ahead and get over to Known. So in the green room right now, we have Known Wells, and we are going to switch over to him. So without further ado, let us try that out. All right. Known, can you hear us? Yes, you can. You're waving.
Hello,
I
hello.
cannot hear him. Oh,
Can you hear
did you
me?
turn that off? 1 second, Known, as we work out some of our things. A classic for us is that I just got this new computer and I have these AirPods, which are really cool, but they keep they keep connecting to the other devices, so it
Yeah.
makes it
Yeah.
slightly confusing. 1 second, hand me those, please.
Yes, sir.
But I gotta say, Noan, I really love that plant you got back there. And although I can't see you, or I can't hear you, you're looking great today.
On my side, I look kind of fuzzy, but maybe that's just the morning.
Well,
They can't hear me.
it's okay if you look a little fuzzy. Just because you think you look a little fuzzy, Noan, I think you look great. You don't actually look fuzzy on my side, so that's good. All right, now I can hear things, but can I hear Noan? Of
There's a
course,
bit
when
of
we
a
have
lag.
there we go. There is a bit of a lag. Okay, well, let's see if we can work through it, and if it becomes an issue, just say something again. All right, so let's try that one more time. Welcome to the Helpful for Life morning show. This is Known Wells from the Feely Human Collective. Known, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Reed? Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So, especially because Known is out on the West Coast, which is 2 hours behind us. That means it's 6 a.m. for him right now.
Wow, bright and early, huh?
Yeah, a little too early.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you so much getting up early to do this live with us. You know me, Reed, but this is my co-host, Ryder.
Hey,
Hey.
nice to meet you.
Hey, exactly.
Yeah, digitally anyway. Yeah, so this is great. We've talked a little bit about you, but yeah, I'm not sure can you give us like a brief summary just for anyone listening on who you are, what you're up to, all those kind of good things?
Yeah. My name's Known Wells. I am a podcaster. I guess I run a little business called the Feely Human Collective. Reed mentioned that. My podcast is You, Me, Empathy, and mental health awareness, empathy education. Um, those sorts of things are my jam. That's who I am.
Yeah, and I met this jam through a group I'm involved in, a community. I think we may have mentioned it on this podcast before, but the importance of community and support and things like that. But the community I met him as part of is called SPI Pro, and SPI stands for Smart Passive Income, and it's a company that's for largely online entrepreneurs, but also other sorts of business people as well, who are, their tagline is looking to work or do the work. I'm going to mess up the tagline now, but it's work hard now to reap the benefits later. So the idea of passive income, meaning that you're not always just strictly trading your time for money. Somewhat like in the art world, like you work some time, spend some time up front, and then you have that thing that makes you money down the line, or a
Yeah,
book
that
or
would
something
that would
like
be
that.
the hope anyway.
Yeah, that would be the hope. Yeah,
Yeah.
so known writer here is an artist, and so we like to relate that in every now
Yeah,
and
we,
then.
we try to drag that into the conversations, but yeah, it is kind of
Nice.
funny. There is these ideas, of course, of sinking a lot of time and energy and doing the hard work up front, and hoping you're going to reap the benefits after. Yeah, and I would assume it's the same with mental health. Reed and I've been talking about that a little bit. The idea of mental health and habits, and we talked a little bit about habits last time. When we get into things like empathy and mental wellness, I can't help but think that there's got to be, as Reed was talking about, some sort of workouts that we can do, some sort of steps. And maybe what we could do is sort of define what that looks like before we start getting into more practical steps.
Yeah. So, Nun, do you, and we kind of briefly talked before you came on about how recognizing that people's interactions with mental health can and what they even think about it and the terminology and talking about it, it can be all over the place, right? There's some people
Yep.
who it's like, I go to therapy 5 times a week, different therapists, different type of thing, and I'm way into that world. And then there's other people who, haven't cried in 20 years and they've never talked about
Yeah, I
emotions.
watched Bridget Jones' Diary once. That's enough. Yeah.
Not that you need to cry to be healthy or whatever, but yeah, so people are on this entire spectrum of how much they're willing to or have in the past talked about that. So having run this You Me Empathy podcast now for 190 episodes or something like that. Congrats on that, by the way. Awesome
Yeah,
podcast,
thanks.
by the way. Whenever I first met you, I went and binged probably like 20 episodes in a row or something like
Oh,
that.
that's
And
sweet. Thank you.
yeah, I liked it a lot. And for those of you who are like, what the heck is this podcast about? I'll let him do a better job explaining it. But the things that I took away from it largely was you're just talking with people, everyday people and some of various levels of quote unquote success, various walks of life, various types of jobs, various types of whatever identities, and then just talking about how they're feeling and what's going on in their heads, and if they have some larger journey. Sometimes you dive into that, and sometimes you talk about more specific topics. But yeah, no. What if you had to describe your podcast in a couple seconds? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's a conversation about feelings, mental health. I think like to reflect on what you two are saying in regards to sort of the spectrum of humanity and mental health. And I think it's important for me, or it has helped me in regards to my own sort of mental health, and the way that I talk about this stuff is that everyone has mental health, right? We start there. So there's this shared humanity, shared connection there. I think it can get problematic, and I sort of rail against this often, to sort of frame mental health in the sort of like, do these 5 steps and then you're successful and you've achieved the thing, you've checked the box, you've crossed the finish line, right? Like
Yeah, right.
that is a thing. It's like a uniquely sort of American thing. Certainly that's a uniquely capitalistic thing. I tend to rail against those things because it's not based in reality, right? I am someone who has clinical depression. I do my very best. I'm good at being someone who's very depressed at times, and it's hard, and it will always be hard, right? And I think, so to get back to sort of the shared piece is like, we all have mental health. That's one thing, right? The other thing, I was sort of eavesdropping on what you said earlier before I popped in here, Reed. You said something about awareness. That's a big piece of it, right? Like, awareness is really everything. Awareness is where it starts, right? So we have to be aware, we have to be curious, we have to look, we have to explore and sort of notice what is going on within us, right? Otherwise, in my experience and from what I've seen in sort of my life, and I've had sort of a lot of trauma, if we're not aware of these things, if we're not sort of doing the work of looking and being curious and unpacking and unlearning and all that stuff, leads to more suffering, leads to more pain. And so more awareness, more sort of like finding those points of connection between one another and reminding one another that we're the same, that we're here together, that we can be mirrors for each other, that we can relate and like go, oh yeah, like I experienced that one thing that one time, or
Right.
I've had that similar sort of pain, right? Like that's the point of the show, is to
Yeah,
give
and
people that safe space, right?
and I think that's the beauty of it too, is because in my opinion, like regardless of how much of a denier you are or however you want to phrase that, you think lives who are going through these types of things, right? That's another lens to look at it through, is like, hey, like even if I'm not going to do it for me, like maybe I can think about it for those around me, because the reality is if I start improving myself, one, that means I'm a better self for people around me, but also that means I'm kind of that leading by example in some ways. And in theory, the people around you will start to try and be better themselves as well.
Yeah, I've sort of known when you're sort of talking about these things, it was sort of reminding me of some interactions that by myself, trying to be more aware of myself, but also more open and more vulnerable and being more willing to talk about these things. It has opened up conversations with people that I never thought would open up. It's very fascinating to go ahead and offer yourself up as problematized, because there is a kind of, especially in Southern dude culture, man. It's, there is kind of a stereotype of men just trying to be tough all the time. And it's really fascinating. I bumped into somebody the other day who's, I just never thought would open up to me, and just sort of started talking to him about going to therapy. And he immediately launched into how him and his wife have been going to therapy. And we opened up into this like hour and a half long conversation where we got into some very deep, touchy territory. And since then, our relationship has been a lot tighter. And this was something I didn't actually expect to ever happen, because I've known this person for 7 or 8 years at this point.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful example of how vulnerability can lead to connection and sort of bridge that gap of empathy. And it's like I think what we do as humans so often is we show up with armor, right? We show up in our sort of very internalized or narrow frameworks of the world because of fear, anxiety, whatever it may be, trauma, etc. The reality is we don't know what people are going through, right? So it's important to ask. It's important to sort of like show up. I talk about this all the time. Show up and meet people where they are. Allow them to sort of show up in all of their rich humanity. And it's true. We're all sort of this tapestry of like fallibility and pain and struggle and joy and light, and it's all valid, right? Like recognizing that it's all valid is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and some of that can be by sharing about yourself and talking about things to get people open. But one of the other things I wanted to point out, that especially in the American culture, and probably even especially more so in the Southern culture, and then especially so with men, like those are all layers, kind of like we were talking about earlier.
Yes,
The
yes.
different layers of operating system and software on top of it. You got to work a little harder sometimes to penetrate. And especially one of my least favorite conventions in America is the shallow introductions and greetings. It's like, oh, hey, how are you? And you're expected to say,
fine. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, I'm fine, or I'm okay, or the default answer a lot of times is good. And it's like,
Oh, I really like it when they get persnickety and they're like, I am well, right? and this kind of, which is fine. It's just one of these things I found that sometimes these conventions, they shift around too. And there's sort of novel ways of answering things, but none of them really get you through to what's really going on with that individual.
Right. Well, one thing I thought of while we were talking here was last night I was playing indoor soccer, right? And as we were playing soccer, there's the people in the front that are attacking, and there's people in the back who are defending. And I was in the people in the front, and I was like, look, we're way up here, we're pressuring, we're trying to get the ball, we're working really hard, and the defense was staying like way back. And they're like, they think they're like doing good, and they think they're protecting themselves because it's like, hey, it's more work to be doing that. But they, by not pushing up, they're leaving all this space, which actually means they're going to have to run more to get to these people here. And then they're going to have a counterattack, which is like, going to be even harder to defend. It's like, but hey, if you just did a little bit of work right now, even though it doesn't seem like that's an easier thing for you, it's actually going to be better for you in the long run.
So positioning yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just recognizing like, hey, if I do a little bit of work now versus doing none, even though I may be more interested in doing less overall, if you will, if you do a little bit of work now, it can help you a lot more in the long run, which we talked a little bit about when it comes to habits and productivity and things like that as well. But also just the idea of doing a little bit each day and not feeling like, oh, all of a sudden, like, oh, I got to go do all the things right now, right?
Yeah, so... Known, when we're talking about these kind of things, I'm thinking about being proactive about these kind of things. I know with depression, then sometimes there's some sort of proactive steps and daily habits people get involved in to sort of help them maintain a kind of balance. Is that, I don't know, is there a practice or something that you could probably recommend you think would be good for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. It's a tough question because we're all sort of, unique flowers. Even you
Yeah.
too, Feely boys. Uh, soft, very soft Feely boys. Um, uh,
Amen.
no, I mean, I think, like I said, it starts with awareness. So I am aware that I have sort of clinical depression that comes with suicidal ideation, that comes with just hard stuff. And so being aware of that stuff and being aware of sort of all of that came before. So like the experiences I've had in the past, right? What my medication does to me, sort of symptom wise, and sort of awareness of all of that stuff. And then sort of doing the work of like exploration, like exploring going outside. How does that feel? Like a thing that helps me is being outside and moving my body.
Mm.
Um, I used to play soccer. Reed mentioned
All
soccer. I
right.
used to play soccer, not anymore. But now I run. I run and I hike and I take my dog for a walk. I make sure I get some sunlight. That helps me for sure. And then, just checking in. I'm always sort of checking in on my body, checking in on my breath. Things like that are really helpful. But I also think that like we're all unique. I think it's sort of unique to each of us. I think there's some foundational things that we can do. Um, I mean, another piece of my health is connection, like things like this, right? Like it helps to um, see myself through another person, right? It helps
Mm.
to have deep conversation. I started doing these things called Feely hikes, and it was based on this conversation or this book by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who basically said like one of the best things you can do for yourself is to go for a walk with a friend. So move your body and have deep conversations. So you're
Hmm.
moving your body and then you're moving your heart, right? Essentially. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. That's very helpful. Um, make
Yep.
sure I eat.
Yeah, that's a good one. No, I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to point out that like a lot of times people are looking for the answer or the quick fix or the bullet, the whatever magic bullet. Especially here in America, right? The listicle, right? Oh, what are the 5 things I can do today? Those types of stuff,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But I want to point out that a handful of the things that Known pointed out are talking about being animal and human core needs, right? And it's like a lot of times people don't recognize how much that can affect their mood or state of being, right? Which is if you find yourself either stressed out or anxious or whatever in any type of way, like, all right, first check, okay, how am I on sleep?
Yeah.
How am I on food? Have I interacted with other humans today
Yeah.
in
Right.
person, not just virtually? And I know that can be harder and harder in this day and age, but even just going to the grocery store or to the convenience store or whatever and having those soft interactions with those people who aren't really your friends but like they are around you, right? Yeah.
No, this was, of course, during the pandemic. That I think we noticed these. We took a lot of these things for granted, and when they were taken away from us, then a lot of people reacted adversely or negatively. It was very difficult on them, even not to have those small interactions. But there was also something really kind of lovely about this idea. Like evolutionarily, we are a species that evolved doing certain things, and walking with other people is like in the sunlight. Like those seem to be things that sort of are core to what it means to be a human, and it's sort of only in our modern convenience-laden environments
Right.
that we can actually skip out of that.
And being a part of nature as well is another big one of those, which can be easy to forget in this day and age when you spend 90+% of your time indoors. But getting out into nature and seeing the trees, and if you're fortunate enough to live near mountains or ocean or whatever, those types of things, that as well. But yeah, just getting outside. And oh, by the way, like we were talking about earlier, put that phone and do not disturb, or even better yet,
Yeah.
leave it inside.
Wait,
And-
what?
I
Walk
know,
around
right?
without my phone?
Well, known. One of the, I guess, questions I have for you is, with Helpful for Life, one of the challenges that I'm trying to achieve is, I want to make sure that we're able to not just preach to the choir, but help bring people into the proverbial church, if you will. And that kind of goes across of a whole bunch of subjects, right? But especially with subjects like this, where mental health, where it's like there's plenty of people who are very much aware of it, recognizing they need to be working on it, doing all those types of things, right? But then there's plenty of people who haven't even thought about it, right? And then if you say, oh, hey, and no offense to you, right? But if let me talk to this guy from the Feely Human Collective, and his podcast is You, Me, Empathy, right? Like, people, I imagine some people kind of like really tighten up and are like, oh, I don't want to do any of that, right? And then
Sure.
what I don't know, have you first of all, have you encountered anyone who has had that reaction visibly or otherwise as you've talked to them? And two, like, yeah, how do you start to slowly onboard them, I guess, for lack of a better term I can come up with?
On board. Well, the cult is open for submissions.
Yes.
No, I mean, I think there's so much at play. You were mentioning intersectionality earlier in regards to like being Southern, being a man, right, identifying as a man, etc., right? But then you're talking about sort of culture, you're talking about race, you're talking about gender. All this intersectionality is at play in regards to what is okay and what is not okay to talk about, right? So I'm 40. I was born in 81. We didn't talk about mental health. That was not a thing, right? That's different now. Like more and more people are talking about it. That's wonderful. That's great. I think that's saving lives, right? But many of us didn't talk about it or didn't feel safe to talk about it, right? So it's recognizing first that there's a ton of intersectionality at play, and we need to sort of allow for that and be patient with that, right? And allow that my experience was different than yours and vice versa, right? And I think just sort of giving people the space to, I think it's really about sort of listening, a lot of listening, really, because you're right. Like I have had experiences where people just sort of like say, nope, you're not for me, right? And that's okay. I think what is important in all of this work, and I think you alluded to it earlier as well, Reed, which is we go inward so we can go outward, right? The more we do the sort of internal work, the more we do that work and sort of awareness work, expansiveness work, sort of figuring out our own stuff, the better we can serve others, right? The better we can sort of connect with others, right? So, and the other thing is you're not going to be able to please everyone, right? Like it's like the Feely Human Collective is not going to be for everyone, and that's okay
Right.
too, right? Like that's another sort of American thing is like I need to get everyone here and on board, and like everyone wants my thing, and I think that's just ego, right? I think we need to recognize that hey, it's not for some people. Some people might be triggered by me,
Sure.
and that's not on me, right? That's on them.
Right, and to go back
Huh.
to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like as the computer analogy, those are just inputs those people are receiving, and then they get to decide what they do with that, right?
Right.
Which also reminded me of those things that are coming at you as inputs. They don't all have to be external. That's one of the things is. And I heard somebody say this, and I'd be curious to hear what you two think about it, but you can't control your thoughts, but you just control what you do with them. Like those thoughts, whether they're positive, negative, or otherwise, they just happen to you. Even though they are internal, in a lot of ways
Yeah.
they are external. And so then you get to decide what you do with that.
Right. And that sort of reminds me of that Schopenhauer quote that man can do as he wills, but he can't will what he wills. And that's a really fascinating spot to get into, is not knowing what to do with these things that bubble up out of you. But yeah, we hopefully can like be aware of those reactions that are coming up inside of us and those feelings, and then at least maybe process them. And I think maybe that's a big part of what we're talking about is just sort of tapping into that awareness. But no, and I wanted to come back to what you were talking about earlier. It's kind of, it does feel difficult sometimes when people sort of reject you. It feels like they're rejecting you, and being able to sort of maintain yourself in the face of that rejection can be difficult.
Yeah, and real quick, Known, just to respect your time, we are at 8:32, so if you need to hop off, Do you need to hop off? We otherwise we're going to go a couple more minutes here.
Yeah, I can go a couple minutes. That's fine.
Okay, cool. So yeah, on Ryder's question about rejecting the person. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there, certainly, Ryder. Like that I think is human. I try not to take anything too personally, right? I think that, again, I don't know exactly what's going on with this person in this example, right? Like, I don't know what they're bringing to the table. Maybe they had an experience with a particular person like me that was hard or negative, or I'm triggering them in some way, right? So it's not necessarily about me. It's sort of the inputs, like you said, what they're bringing to the table. I think that I think I try to sort of live in the world. I lead a lot of empathy workshops, and what I always say is, how can we sort of better sort of show up in all of our sort of authenticity and honesty and truth and etc. And that takes work to get there, right? Like you were talking, Ryder, about awareness. Like the more we are aware, the more we are sort of aware of our triggers and aware of our stuff, and as we sort of do that work, the easier it gets, right? So like I say I have depression, I can say, oh, I've been in this deep dark place before. I know that like I can get through it. I know that I've survived in the past. And I think I've sort of lost the question in there, but yeah.
No, no,
Anyways.
it's great. It's I think it comes back to some of the things we were talking about earlier is sort of moving up, right? Positioning yourself so that when that negative moment hits, or whatever that moment is, it doesn't have to be negative, but when that moment hits, that you can at least be aware of it. And I think that might take getting into tune with yourself even when times are good.
Yeah, and so to put a little bow on the conversation for today, and we hope to have Known come join us in the future as well, because there are plenty of conversations we could have around this topic. And then also, it'd also be interesting to hear about some of the interesting guests and conversations that you've had on your podcast. And as a reminder, the show is called You, Me, Empathy, which you can find anywhere you find podcasts. And the website is the company is Feely Human Collective, which is at feelyhuman.co. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Perfect. Look, somehow my memory worked on that one.
Well done.
But I wanted to remind everyone of the challenge that I gave you earlier, which was to get rid of your notifications, even if just for a short amount of time. At the very least, swipe down from the top right if you're on an iPhone, Android, I'm not sure, but go into that do not disturb mode or airplane mode and put your phone away from you. Break that habit, reduce those inputs, and you might be surprised how big of a difference it can make on your focus. Even if you're one of those people who is like, oh, I've got it under control, I'm not that distracted. Yeah, just try it out, at least for a day. See what it's like.
Yeah, and just be aware of those feelings when they rise up.
Yeah.
There will be feelings, and you can just go, oh, there it is. I knew it was coming.
Right.
And you can figure out what to do with it.
Yes, and then one other little mini bonus challenge we'll throw in there, since we're talking about mental health. Ask somebody how they're doing, and then after they give you their answer of fine or okay or whatever, like, no, but like, really, like, how are things with you? Like, are you have you been doing well? You've been doing poorly? What's really bothering you? And oh, by the way, that person can be yourself. And we're talking about what are some first steps people can do if they've never really been exposed to this at all. I think asking that question and then really being honest with yourself, or having that conversation with somebody else, is a great way to do it. And oh, by the way, I'll even write a little script for you. Like, hey, Johnny or Susie, like, I don't normally do this, but this random guy on the internet, he told me I needed to ask somebody today, how are you really doing? And I'd be curious. I'm uncomfortable asking this, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are, right? And obviously, who you're talking to, you can vary that script to what level, right? Or you can also even go and offer, be like, hey, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I'm been feeling lately. Are you open to that? And you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it'll be brave if you're not accustomed to doing it. and it'll push yourself, and that's probably something we should be doing more often. Not all the time, but yeah, if you can muster the courage for it, awesome.
Yeah, and also if it's something you're gonna do for yourself, I would encourage you to maybe write it out, or something that some people find a little easier. Just press a little record on your voice memo on your phone and just talk it out. And guess what? You don't have to even do anything with it. You can just leave it. You can delete it. You can share it with someone if you want to, but just that fact of like thinking about it, being honest with yourself and kind of talking it through, guess what? It feels weird. It felt weird for me the first time I did it, but now it's so nice. It feels like all that stuff that's stirring around in your head, whether or not you realize it, being able to get it outside of yourself, I found makes a really big difference. Known, any thoughts on that or last thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I love that, and I try to sort of model that myself. I think um, be be open to like not everyone being open to having that conversation, right? Like that's a brave thing, like Ryder said. That's a brave thing to do. Another sort of thing about all of this work is like we don't have to do it 24/7. Like that's
Yes,
impossible.
amen
So
to that.
take breaks, take rest. Sometimes we do need a day inside.
Amen to that. Well, thank you very much, Known, for joining us today. Again, the Feely Human Collective at feelyhuman.co, and the podcast is You, Me, Empathy. Make sure to check that, guys, out. Even make sure to check that out, guys.
And gals.
And gals and everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, make sure to check out that podcast. Even if it's like, oh, that's not really for me, just maybe scroll through and look and see if one of the, 190, surely maybe one of those will be something that either you can think of might relate to yourself or somebody you know. And maybe there are certain things that deep down inside you've thought either you or somebody else have maybe been dealing with. Go listen to see what it's like and see what other people are talking about, because that's one of the really big things with whether it be podcast or learning through reading people's blogs and things like that, getting into other people's heads and seeing how they are thinking and feeling. I've felt so many times like, yes, I felt that too, or I've thought that too. And maybe I just can't say it in that way, but once someone says it, it's like, oh yeah, that's it, the nail on the head right there. So do your notifications, go listen to his podcast, You, Me, Empathy. Known, you have a great day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.